The cause of death has been revealed in the disturbing case of a 13-year-old boy who was allegedly killed by his soccer coach. Oscar Omar Hernandez was found in a ditch in California days after his family reported him missing when he didn't return home from visiting his coach, Mario Garcia-Aquino. Now, that coach sits behind bars, charged with murder. Thanks for joining us. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the details. You're watching Law and Crime. Oscar Omar Hernandez, known to his family as Omar, was just 13 years old. He was a 7th grader who loved soccer and dreamed big. But that passion would ultimately place him in the hands of the man now accused of taking his life. Prosecutors allege that Omar's soccer coach, Mario Garcia-Aquino, killed the teen on March 28th, the last day they were reportedly seen together. Now, the teen's cause of death has been revealed. According to the Ventura County medical examiner, Omar died of acute alcohol intoxication. The manner of death is homicide, according to the LA Times. The discovery is raising questions about what happened in the hours leading up to the teen's death. Omar's sister, Alexandra, told KCAL News that their family dropped him off at a Metrolink train station that Friday evening. She says he was headed to help Garcia-Aquino make soccer jerseys at the coach's home. But when it got late and no one heard from Omar, the family grew concerned. They called his phone, and they say the coach answered. Garcia-Aquino allegedly told them Omar couldn't talk because his hands were full of paint. The coach was supposed to drive Omar home the next morning, but Saturday came and there was still no sign of him. Then a series of text messages came in from Omar's phone. The first saying, "I'm going to a party." The family replied, "Don't go." Another message followed, this time claiming he was in North Hollywood and refusing to be picked up. Those were the last texts the family would ever receive. Days later, Oscar's body was found in a ditch in Oxnard, California. In April, the 43-year-old was charged with murder, including a special circumstance allegation of murder during the commission or attempted commission of lewd acts with a child. Under California law, murder with special circumstances means prosecutors may pursue the death penalty or life without parole. Police also revealing nearly a year before Omar's death, another teenager accused Garcia-Aquino of sexual abuse. According to prosecutors, that teen also met Garcia-Aquino through soccer and had been allowed to spend the night at the coach's home. But no charges were filed in that case for 10 months. The delay, officials say, stemmed from a massive backlog in the court system with nearly 10,000 pending cases due to a staffing crisis and other systematic issues. Garcia-Aquino has pleaded not guilty to all charges. And here to break down this story with me is criminal defense attorney David Shapiro. David, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just jump right in. Prosecutors are saying that Omar died of alcohol poisoning. Can a murder charge still hold up if there wasn't clear intent to kill?
Yeah, a murder charge definitely can hold up if there's not clear intent to kill. The issue is, will the special circumstances murder hold up, right? And then what do we know other than acute alcohol intoxication, right? What other circumstances were going on before that led up to that ultimate cause of death, right? So there's a couple of things in play here. The first is you could just have reckless indifference to human life, and an argument can be made, and a pretty compelling argument can be made, that a grown man giving, a 13, 14-year-old boy significant amount of alcohol, assuming that could actually be proven, is something so reckless to human life. It's sort of the theory when we see DUI murder, right, where someone's not intending to kill somebody, but they do, and the prosecutor argues they had reckless indifference to human life in that they were aware of the risk, they disregarded the risk that a normal, ordinary, prudent person would not do. So that is certainly possible. I think from a prosecution perspective, there's going to need to be something else there in order to get them as far as special circumstances, because they also need to prove the underlying, in this case, the sexual abuse that ultimately led to the murder, right? That makes it a special circumstances case. So there's a new wrinkle in this, and the autopsy showing the results that it did and the conclusions that the medical examiner made, threw this case for a little bit of a wrinkle, but we're going to see over time what else is there.
I want to thank Odoo for sponsoring this news package. Odoo is a powerful, all-in-one business software that helps you manage everything from sales to accounting and, yes, manufacturing. Schedule your production, manage your assembly line, and fine-tune your work orders with Odoo's all-in-one, easy-to-use platform. Need fully assembled manufacturing software that will put your business ahead of schedule? Odoo has you covered. Plus, Odoo's manufacturing app syncs seamlessly with your sales, inventory, and purchasing models, so everything stays connected and running smoothly. Check out Odoo to take your manufacturing process to the next level and get a free 15-day trial today at odoo.com/lcnewsmanufacturing. And you bring up a good point there, right? Because I'm just trying to figure out how the prosecution will be able to just connect the dots. If they can't prove how the alcohol was given to him, is that a weak spot in the case?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is, because the issue is they need to prove first that they were together, right? Or that he supplied the alcohol, that the suspect, the defendant, supplied the alcohol to the minor who ultimately lost his life. So there's one element there that they need to really hone in on. But I think there's a lot of other things, right? There's likely video evidence, there's likely cell site data evidence, there could be license plate reader evidence, so tracking movements of where this one or these two individuals were going in that 1 or 2 day window when the boy was unaccounted for, and then ultimately several days later, ultimately being found dead, I believe, in Oxnard. So there's going to be a lot more than just eyewitness testimony. We also don't know what the accused has said to law enforcement under questioning. Did he submit to questioning? What, if anything, did he say? How much of those dots did he connect himself through his own statements to the police during interrogation?
And of course, we're just speculating here, but in your opinion, what kind of forensic evidence will prosecutors need in order to truly link Garcia-Aquino directly to Omar's death? Or do you think they've already done that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think, to come out of the gate with special circumstances murder, that they know a lot of things and have a lot of things lined up in regard to that. But what we normally would see in cases, especially when they come out as capital murder or special circumstances murder in California, is that there's more. They rarely, if ever, have an eyewitness to the actual killing, but there could be social media, there could be text message admissions, there could be cell site data stuff. There could be examples of license plate readers to track the movement of the vehicle that the suspect was driving. There could be things on Omar's cell phone, the videos that were taken, pictures that were taken, videos or pictures that were taken on the suspect's phone. So it's really a combination of things that we see, especially nowadays, that there's rarely just one thing of forensic evidence or one key piece of circumstantial evidence, let's say. It's usually a pretty high pyramid of things that ultimately leads to the prosecutor to file these cases and ultimately try and get these convictions.
And the victim's family says that the coach allegedly answered Omar's phone and gave misleading information. How might that play into proving consciousness of guilt?
Well, it could arguably play a big role, right? Because what the family is going to say is, if someone spoke and he picked up the phone and said something like, hey, he's at a party, or he's not here, he's unavailable to get to the phone right now. Well, what they're also showing is that this was not like, oh my God, what have I just done? This was presumably, there was some semblance of a panic there if it wasn't an outright planning killing, right? But what we also see is then we have the attempted cover up, which is key evidence of consciousness of guilt. And a lot of times in criminal cases, especially of this magnitude, the suspect's conduct or alleged conduct after the actual death is more telling and more compelling to their guilt than what they might have been doing up to that ultimately led to the death in the first place. It's how they act after the fact that prosecutors will be banging the table. He knew what he did. He knew he killed him. He knew he now was trying to get away with it and was coming up with these stories to buy time with the family. That's going to be something we're going to see over and over again.
Right, because the family says that they allegedly, called and he said, oh, he can't come to the phone because he had paint on his hands. Then they said like a text message came the next day, allegedly saying that, and this was in the voice of Omar. They thought Omar was texting, but they now believe that it was the coach saying that he was going to a party. The family told him no. And then after that, they just didn't hear anything back. With those text messages, I mean, could that open the door to tech evidence like location pings or IP data?
100%. I mean, yeah. I mean, in the clearest sense, when you're sending messages, when you're making or receiving calls, yeah. But I mean, nowadays you're on social media, you're doing anything. You're doing an auto refresh on your email every 15 minutes to check an email. That's giving out a location of where at least your phone is. And sometimes there's a disconnect between where your phone is and where you physically may be. And that's something the prosecutor is going to need to address as well, as relates to, well, where was at least Omar's phone when that message was sent? Where was Omar's phone when the suspect picked up the call and said he had paint on his hand? Where was his phone when he said he was going to a party in Hollywood or whatever has been alleged? And then they're going to need to try and basically put together some evidence, or at least a theory, as to where Omar was. More often than not, you're where your phone is, especially nowadays, right? But in situations like this, they're going to need to put together that timeline and figure out at what point, if any, did he become separate from his phone.
Right. And then a few days after the family reported Omar missing, his body was found in a ditch. Is it legally significant that the body was found in a ditch rather than left in the home? Does location matter in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, that's another component of what we've talked about previously, which is that consciousness of guilt, right? And trying to cover things up. And if it was in fact an accident, well, why wouldn't you report it as such? You knew you did something wrong, and then you tried to destroy the evidence. You tried to dispose of this young boy's body at a distance, albeit, within Southern California. But Oxnard is not necessarily Lancaster. It's actually a decent amount of miles away, all within the same region, but still a decent amount of miles away. So that's going to be conscious of guilt. There's going to be part of that bigger cover up, and with cell site data, with black boxes in vehicles, depending on the age of the vehicle, with license plate readers. I anticipate the prosecution has and certainly will be able to put forth evidence tracking the suspect's movements in the days pretty much from when Omar allegedly went out to eastern Los Angeles County.
And are we assuming that, police are going to be, since according to documents that Omar died, from alcohol intoxication, just how will they go about the fingerprints? Like, are they looking for his fingerprints on some type of alcohol bottle since there aren't any eyewitnesses? How do they tie that? Or does that weaken the case if they aren't able to find fingerprints?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know necessarily that they need to find fingerprints on alcohol bottles, so to speak, but there may be videos, there may be messages that were exchanged between the two, there may be messages that were exchanged from the suspect's phone or from Omar's phone that talk about alcohol. And then the other issue is, was this a situation where you have, was he 13 years old, I think, at the time he ultimately passed away? Was he voluntarily consuming alcohol under sort of the guidance of a adult figure, in this case the suspect? Or is the defense potentially going to be that, hey, this kid came out to Lancaster, where he went afterwards, we don't know, my client doesn't know, and the prosecution needs to prove that? They could get there, I think, different ways other than fingerprint evidence, especially if alcohol was being purchased in those days, how it was being purchased, if it's purchased on credit cards, surveillance video, license plate reader stuff that we talked about. I think they're going to be able to put together on a map of Los Angeles County and Ventura County and Oxnard where his body was ultimately found. And likely, at least, from a prosecutor's standpoint, they should be able to, and you hope they're able to map the trajectory of the course of how things started and ultimately how things ended.
Right. And we'll dive deeper into the potential defense strategy in a moment. But we know that police say that this coach was also accused of abuse by another teen nearly a year before Omar's death. What's your reaction to just the 10-month delay in filing charges?
Yeah, I mean, the 10-month delay, as a criminal defense attorney in Southern California, the 10-month delay is not abnormal at first glance to the public eye, right? And it certainly is. It's a significant amount of time. These cases do take time to build because they're rarely witnessed by anyone. It's rarely on video. It usually comes from a complaint is made from a child or a mandatory reporter that the child talks to and discloses the alleged abuse. And then you're trying to get information about the suspect. You're trying to get the suspect maybe on a controlled call to talk to the accuser and to admit certain things. You're getting search warrants for social media, for cell phone data, all that type of stuff. It certainly takes time. And then there's a backlog within each district attorney's office, LA certainly being at the forefront of it. The delay itself is not abnormal. The consequences, though, are obviously because there's been a lot of talk, and understandably so, that had this case been prosecuted, had these first one or two cases been prosecuted, and he was at least under the eye of the court on some sort of supervision, if not in custody and pretrial detention, that Omar could possibly still be alive today.
Yeah, you literally just took the words out of my mouth, because A lot of people are saying that because maybe if it didn't take 10 months, maybe if they investigated it right away, like how we just mentioned, the 13-year-old could still be alive. Now, prosecutors reportedly say that the delay was caused by a 10,000 case backlog. Is that justifiable or does it signal a larger problem?
Okay, so the 10,000 case backlog, I mean, that's a little abnormal, but it's Los Angeles. So we have to understand that, right? You're dealing with prosecutors. I think in that unit, especially, there's been a lot of turnover at that office in particular. As we had a new DA come in several months ago, we know a lot about the inter office politics and the publicity and everything going on in Los Angeles in general, but especially with this DA Nathan Hochman. A lot of people have changed careers. Some people arguably have been forced out. So we're dealing with a situation where filings should be relatively steady based on what is being reported, but they are exponentially lower in staffing, presumably in funding. And that's how we have this backlog. And unfortunately, when you have a backlog like this in the most serious of investigative units, stuff like this, it sounds terrible to say, but it is preventable, but it is also quite foreseeable when you have situations like we have in Los Angeles right now.
Could prosecutors bring in that first victim's allegation to show a pattern of behavior, or would that be considered prejudicial?
No, without crime. I mean, from a defense standpoint, everything's prejudicial, right? But as far as those other accusers, I believe they actually charge them as alleged victims, but they don't need to. The fact that they're charged as alleged victims, they're going to join these cases together at some point. Great for the prosecutor, but even if they weren't charging these two other accusers from the previous accusations, they could still come in basically under prior bad act evidence, and the theory being almost like, hey, this is someone's predisposition in a way. Normally in California, that type of evidence is not allowed. However, under the evidence code in sex cases in particular, certainly sex cases involving minors, more likely than not, that evidence would come in either way, whether the jury is assessing those accusers as their own charges, as their own named alleged victims, or whether they're using it sort of to bootstrap the evidence in Omar's death, and to lead them more likely to convict. Time will tell what the prosecutor decides to do there.
And just wondering in regard to going back to that backlog, wondering if the family, whether that be of the first alleged victim or Omar's family, really, if they could just sue the system or the DA's office for negligence.
Yeah, I mean, they could certainly try. The issue is what else could they have done? What else could the prosecutors have done? What else could the units have done, given the unique set of circumstances with, people leaving and short-staffed and backlog and everything else? I mean, it would definitely, you want this family who suffered so much and has gone through so much to get some sort of justice, even beyond if the case can be proven against the suspect, right, for him to be convicted if there's enough evidence there. But you also want as much relief and as much healing as possible. I'm concerned that it would set a very bad precedent from the perspective of, if they're allowed to do this and get a pretty hefty settlement, then pretty much anyone who's going to be going after prosecutors' offices, if you don't file it in 10 months, if you don't file it in 4 months, if you don't file it in 4 days, and that's a pretty slippery slope. But they can certainly try. How successful they'll be, we'll see. But they're going to need to, get a little more just than, hey, there's a delay in filing, because there's so many compelling reasons why that happens that don't involve even negligence, certainly not intentional wrongdoing.
Right. Well, realistically, what does Garcia-Aquino face if convicted on all charges?
Yeah, because he's charged with special circumstances murder in California, it's technically a capital case. So worst case for him, if he's convicted of the murder and at least one special circumstance. Primarily, this one is a special circumstance being that it was it tied up and connected to child molest or sexual assault of a minor, right? Lewd and lascivious conduct of someone under 14 here in California. He could be capital punishment eligible. Now, the likelihood of that is not great given California's history with the death penalty, at least the better part of the last 20 years or so. But alternatively, if the district attorney elects not to go the quote unquote death route, then he is facing life without the possibility of parole. So it is a life sentence no matter which way you look at it, irrespective of whether or not they go capital or not.
The defense says, Garcia-Aquino pleaded not guilty. What kind of strategy might his team take from here?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I know the arraignment, I think, was continued a couple of times, which is kind of unique in that regard. The fact he entered a not guilty plea, everyone enters a not guilty plea, whether, you're the most innocent person in the world or you're the most guilty person in the world, especially in a case of this magnitude. And it's ultimately going to be dictated in many ways by what the state of the evidence is and what the state of the evidence is not. And a key piece of this case, which seems like many moons away from now, is going to be the preliminary hearing, which is where the district attorney puts on evidence by way of testimony. Witnesses testify, law enforcement testify, forensic people presumably testify. And we, for the first time, will likely get a real good, sort of like a Reader's Digest version or a quick, sort of like an AI summary of what this entire case is. And a lot of times in cases like this, from a defense perspective, you see where the discovery is and where the discovery isn't. And you go into that preliminary hearing with a specific goal, maybe to set stuff up for later on, more so than, hey, we're going to get the whole case dismissed. So the defense may very well play it close to the vest. But by the time the preliminary hearing comes around, other than an actual trial, that's when we as the public get to know so much more about this case.
Right, because just wondering if the defense could argue that maybe Omar drank voluntarily and just tries to shift the blame.
100%, especially if that is the manner of death, as we learned this week from the medical examiner. That's what sort of caught me by surprise, because that was not on my short list of cause of deaths based on where we were when this case started several months ago in the spring of 2025. So one thing is going to be voluntary consumption without the knowledge and certainly without the consent of their client, right? The accused in this case. Doesn't necessarily mean there's not other charges that he is good for, but the issue is going to be, did that actually cause his death, and what role did the suspect play in Omar's death? There may very well be stronger evidence that there was some sort of sexual impropriety going on here, some sort of sexual assault, whether it was a history of that or just in that short window of time. But to get to that murder is certainly going to be something that the prosecution is going to need to come up with more than just the fact that he was a minor and passed away of acute alcohol intoxication.
Right. And I was just going to ask before I let you go, just what's the biggest legal hurdle prosecutors will face in securing a conviction?
Yeah, I mean, based on what we know right now, I think the biggest hurdle is, well, you think, a lot of people may think, well, what was he doing? Is the accusation he was pouring alcohol down this kid's mouth, or that he was, disguising it as something else? That very well may not even have been the case. I think just the optics of it, right? Where in one regard you have a young boy who lost his life tragically, and there's no excuse, there's no justification under law or otherwise for it, right? But what we also need to figure out is, how do they tie that to the suspect in this case? And from a defense perspective, a lot of times you may represent someone and you may be arguing a case to a jury, and you may be like, listen, no one is saying what my client is accused of doing is okay, socially, morally, legally. And he may very well be guilty of these charges, but what they're trying to get him on here is a stretch, and they're banking on a jury potentially convicting based on fear and based on just not liking him and these deplorable acts that he may have very well committed, whether with Omar or with others, and reaching and not holding the prosecution to that same burden no matter what the charge is. So that's the biggest thing from a defense perspective that I would be looking at, and something the prosecution may very well need to overcome.
Is there a chance this becomes a plea deal down the line?
That depends. I mean, the first step is obviously, we go through a preliminary hearing. And then there's the opportunity where the defense is going to need to make their case to try and take the death penalty off the table. Doesn't mean that life without parole is still on the table, still would be. Is there a potential? We'll know a lot more, I think, after the preliminary hearing or after more evidence comes out. When there's this much at stake, though, it either induces a plea because you want to get this away from being a capital case. At the same time, there's so much that the prosecution may not want to negotiate in any way, shape, or form. So it may have to go to trial, even if it is not a strong case for the defense. We'll know a lot more in the months ahead for sure.
Right. This is a case that we will definitely be following. David, thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Garcia-Aquino is due back in court in August. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.